Right, morning, folks. Some of you won't necessarily know me, but I'm Jenny Milne, founder of SRITC. I do look like I've been crying. I am crying. I'm just suffering with a rural problem, and that's not called bad weather. It's called severe hay fever at the moment. So just apologise if I start itching my eyes, but I'm very glad that today Dami is actually co-hosting with us. So you're not going to hear a huge amount from me. It's going to be Dami, so I can sit there and itch my eyes constantly, which is great. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start, and I hand over to Dami. As usual, can you please just keep yourself muted at the moment? We'll come to chat box in a minute, but it is your friend. I will ask you about cake and coffee in a minute. And as usual, if you aren't familiar with it, could you just put your postcode into the chat or the country that you're based in, just so we can get an idea of where people are and what's happening. And finally, it's all about sharing ideas, which is exactly what Dami and his panel are going to do. But for those of you that aren't aware of who SRITC is, this is for you. If you've heard it before, permission to sleep for the next 2 minutes. So myself, Alex and Ali are the three directors of SRITC, and I founded it back in 2018, but we officially became a kick in 2021. It is not our day jobs. It's very much what we do outside of the day jobs. And for that, we're very grateful because we've also got an advisory board, which is chaired by Laurie Pickup, who's based in Italy. But we also have Artemis, who I don't think is necessarily with us this morning, but she's Scottish Rural and Islands Parliament, as well as Scottish Rural Action. We've got Kate Pamborn, we've got Linda, who is already here, Michael Wilmot, Rabina, who's in Shetland, who sadly can't make it today, and neither can Ali. But I've been telling you for the last couple of months, we've got some musketeers joining us, and these are our volunteers also that help out with the back end of making things happen. So I'm going to embarrass them because some of them are here today because they've got bigger photographs. So we've got Angus from Love to Ride, who is one of them. We also have Dami, so you can be very well used to him and his photograph. You've got James Gleave, and you've got Sheila Gilmore, and you have, he's already spoken to those of you that were here earlier, Swain, who is sitting in Orkney. So that's the team behind SRITC. And without boring you completely about how it works, but we do run online events. We will be at main events, but we're here to support people living and breathing rural transport, whether that's their day job, whether it's your community, but we want to help share things. So I will just emphasize the fact that we are really about just bringing people together. So thank you for giving up your time on this Friday morning. And I will ask you now for cake. So who is going to be the first one to show in their video, other than John Carr, who's got carrot cake, who I'm sure he will tell you earlier on. I've had to cheat this morning because of PhD commitments. I've had to go and buy a croissant. What's Kat got? Kat's got some tablet that looks rather nice. What have you got there, Kat?
Not quite. It's a peppermint slice.
Oh, very nice.
I'd love to say it's homemade, but no, it's Aldi.
Matt, what do you have there? That looks like peanut butter and toast from my uneducated eye.
It's a Pop-Tart.
A Pop-Tart. Oh gosh, I can't remember the last time I had a Pop-Tart. And Stuart's face is just classical. Couldn't remember the last time I had one. Anybody else got something with them? Tea or coffee? Mine's not arrived yet. Vanessa's got her coffee, I think, as well. So all about being a cafe and bringing together when we can't actually sit together. So what's been happening in the last month since we last chatted and some of you came along? As I said, Brian's here today. Matt and I were fortunate enough to go to Evora just outside Portugal, where Brian, who lives in Carnoustie, who I haven't seen for years, we managed to catch up. And that was the SmarterNet European Rural Mobility get together that we got some funding for to go and attend. This is also helping us look at European Horizon funding and be able to be involved in projects in Europe. So we will disseminate out the SmarterNet experience, but suffice to say, Matt, myself and Brian had a good opportunity to discuss all things Scottish based, which ties neatly in with our Rural and Island Mobility Plan. This is feeding in, for those of you that don't know, to Scottish Government's Rural Delivery Plan, which is covering the whole of Scotland, not just for transport, but for education, social justice, housing, etc. And we're pulling together the Rural and Island Mobility Plan. So a bit of a plea, if you haven't read your news bulletin documents, emails, could you possibly send us any documents that you've got? They don't need to be just Scotland based. that relate to rural mobility or the rural landscape, because we're just finishing off some desktop lit review on this. So if you're a community sitting there, I'm thinking about CAT at this point in time, that may have some documents that haven't made it online or are not easy to find online, can you just please send them through to the SRITC email, and one of the team will put that into the chat. So the findings of all of this, and some of it's very interesting, will be shared in our next cafe in June, and how it all fits together with the rural delivery plan and what the stage 2 is. And at the same time, we will actually, for the next cafe, have one of our regular attenders, who I think's just come in, Sasha from Germany. He'll be at the International Islands Conference, so he will give us some insight to that as well. Just a bit of a reminder, we all try and take a bit of a break over the summer, so your inboxes will not receive emails and bits and pieces. And if you do contact the team, just give them a bit more time, because we're trying to take a bit of a proper break over the July and August, because it's been a full-on year. For those of you that actually want to go to an in-person event, you will find us next week at the Mass Scotland event, and we are running the workshop, and Steve Cassidy is with us today. He is helping me coordinate this. And we are looking at rural mobility as a service, and this is an in-person event. If you want to attend, you can do. Speak to Ali McEnroy about a special rate as an SRITC person. And finally, we've got the Royal Highland Show, which is taking place the 20th to 23rd of June in Edinburgh. Massive show. We will be in the Scottish Government tent on the Thursday, Friday, and then when the Scottish Government go home, whole load of communities taken over. So we will have an elevator bike. And if you don't know what that is, you'll have to come to find out what it is. Anyway, that's the news from me. I'm now handing over to Dami, and I am going to eat my croissant. So Dami, thank you very much for this, and good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Jenny. Just got a poll on my screen that I need to answer real quick. Here we go. So lovely to see everyone today. So yeah, my name is Dami Debayo, and I'm going to be leading the session today. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Please tell me if you can see that or if you cannot.
All good.
Perfect. So today's session is going to focus on the value of demand responsive transport. I'm here on behalf of the Routing Company, or TRC for short. We are a digital demand responsive transport technology provider active in the UK, but also globally in the Netherlands, the US, and some other European countries. The idea of today is really to have quite an open discourse about the various ways that DRT provides value to communities, and also how we can measure success. And I want us to go, beyond some of the transport basics of patronage and network coverage and cost effectiveness, but also, alternative measures around social outcomes, knock-on economic value, as well as environmental considerations. I think it's a great forum to have this discussion where we can do more than just provide updates on DRT programs. So yeah, that's the plan for today. It's not just going to be me speaking. I am joined by a fantastic panel. So I will be hosting the panel, but most of the talking will be from the three people you see on the screen here. So we have Vanessa from Aberdeenshire Council, who's the Rural Transport Project Officer. We have Craig Lamberton from East Sussex County Council, who's the team manager of the Transport Hub. Apologies, Craig, that there's no picture of him there, but he is here, and he does look better than that bus. And then we have John Carr, who is a transport consultant who has various experience across DRT over the years. So just to set the scene real quick, make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. What is digital demand responsive transport? DDRT for short, probably get overloaded with acronyms. I've tried to describe it with 3 bullet points on the right-hand side there. So what DDRT is it's a system in which you have a bunch of people who want to go from different origins to destinations, and you need to effectively route and schedule a bus to serve them. So what happens is you have passengers that can request a trip that can be either through an app or a call center. I want to be clear that DDRT isn't only through an app, it can still be through a call center like a traditional dial-a-ride. The second point is then you have an algorithm which basically calculates how to pull those trips together in the most effective manner, and will basically factor in different constraints in terms of how long you let people wait or how long people are detoured on the vehicle. And then once the algorithm comes up with a schedule, the driver automatically will receive the sequence and the route that they have to take through an app, and they will service those trips. That's it in a nutshell. Obviously, there's a lot more under the hood, but that hopefully explains to anybody who wasn't familiar with DRT what it is. To talk a little bit about the value of DRT and where it sits in the sort of transport realm. What we have on this slide is, transport solutions can generally be categorized into two buckets. So on the left-hand side, you have private flexible services, and then on the right-hand side, you have public efficient services. So on-demand technology platforms like our software, which is called Pingo, is basically the opportunity to try and deliver on the best of both worlds, where you can get the sort of flexibility and book trips similar to what feels like a taxi and ride-hailing service, but it's not quite there because there's other passengers in the vehicle, similar to a public transport service. So we're really we're in an era now where people expect hyper convenience, and on-demand transport adds that layer of convenience, accessibility, and flexibility to the efficiency that we have with public transport. And the last slide for me before I'll shut up is to basically just talk to my perspective on the value of DRT. I've included here just a few screenshots of some some text from different riders in the community that use our product. Our product the service was sadly stopped because of budget constraints. And, various people have spoken up about that in particular in terms of the impact that the services had for them. I think the problem with how DRT is measured a lot of times today is you look at it in terms of just pure numbers and ridership, and sometimes it might not look, that is doing well when you compare it to a fixed route transport service. But then when you hear the stories of the people who are actually using the service, the people who have disabilities, who are carers, who needed the service and the technology to be able to access transport in a way that they couldn't before. This is, for me, what I think is really important to bring to light. This is the qualitative aspect of it. I think you can measure some of this, which is what some of the panel will be discussing today. But yeah, I just wanted to share this because, these are stories that, came close to my heart in terms of it's disappointing when riders have a service like this taken away from them as well. So that's me done. I'll now hand over to Vanessa, who will talk to her experience in DRT and what she's done across Aberdeenshire.
So, hi everyone, I'm Vanessa. It's actually my first time attending this cafe, so I don't think many people will know me. But I'm the Rural Transport Project Officer for Aberdeenshire Council, and I came into post in early 2023, just when it became apparent that the Ready to Go Around Inverurie pilot project would come to an end. So my post is co-funded by Aberdeenshire Council and Nestrans, which is the transport partnership here in the region. And I was tasked with evaluating the Ready to Go Around Inverurie project and producing a sort of lessons learned document to see, right, if there's going to be another service like this in the future, what could be done better. So these documents have been produced. They're available. If you don't know where to find them, I'm happy to send a link later. At the moment, I'm working on the passenger transport strategy for Aberdeenshire Council, which will sort of look what place DDRT and other transport solutions have in the region for the next 10-15 years. And just a little bit about Ready to Go Around Inverurie. So it was a pilot project that was running from August 2021 to April 2023, and it was based in and around the town of Inverurie. It was put on as a project to see if DDRT could replace or partially replace some of the fixed timetable services. It was a service that was run with 5 vehicles, Monday to Friday from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. and Saturdays from 7:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. The service could be booked through an app or through a phone line, which was staffed by a council officer. So the pilot project was initially only planned to run until August 2022, but at that stage, it was meant to be extended for another year. However, around Christmas 2022, the council took the decision to withdraw it prematurely in April 2023, including the high running costs of the service and the lack of progress within the software to crew passengers appropriately. Yeah, that's a bit about ready to go.
Thank you, Vanessa. So we'll have time for questions at the end, but I'll just hand over now to Craig to introduce the East Sussex project.
Good morning. My name is Craig. I'm the Passenger Transport Manager at East Sussex County Council. And as part of our bus service improvement plan, which we received £41.4 million of funding, we planned and then delivered DDRT called Flexibus in East Sussex across, covering up around 90% of East Sussex, running initially 10 vehicles, now running 8 vehicles. That started in May last year, so just been running, 9th of May last year, so just been running slightly over a year. We've got funding until end of March next year, and it's very likely that we will use some funding underspend and run that for an additional year till March 25. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, and Dan's got a few questions lined up. So yeah, East Sussex, Flexibus, 8 buses, look exactly like that picture there, and not me. Thanks for the picture, Danny, with the side of a bus. It's my fault. I didn't give you a headshot. I apologize. It was my fault.
No, good. Awesome. And then we'll hand over to John. There we go. John, you're on mute.
Thanks, everybody. I think Craig might actually have a better picture than I've got. I just want to say a quick word or two about Dales Bus, which was, as it says on the slide, established, I think it was possibly even before that. It's about its 20th year now, as a community interest company, which harvested grants and donations from bodies in the area who wanted to see adequate public transport services preserved for primarily initially ramblers in the Dales, but then extending from that to tourist facilities in the Dales, and also where we can, serving local communities. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it was initiated because the Colin Speakman and his Yorkshire Ramblers and Dales Ramblers objected to North Yorkshire County Council cutting subsidy for a service that they found particularly useful as a link to get them into the heart of the Dales from the railhead at Skipton. North Yorkshire County Council effectively got slightly fed up with them and said, well, if you think you can do better, we'll give you half the subsidy. Metro, the PTE, which I was in, matched that so that they had effectively the whole subsidy. And basically, it was a social experiment to see whether the community sector could deliver better value for money. And the sheer fact that on the same basis, the services are still running Saturdays, Sundays, and bank holidays some 20 years later shows that indeed they could. It's a disappointment to me that this approach hasn't been tried more widely elsewhere. And in particular, although I did manage to get a Sustainable Local Transport Fund grant for it, the work we wanted to do there on hubs and other things was politically hijacked, and we ended up with spending money to give good benefit, admittedly, for children travelling into the Dales in their school holidays. And indeed, so successful was that one of the operators adopted it as a commercial initiative. But slightly disappointed that we haven't actually been able to see the same approach replicated on an all-week basis. Dammy's added kindly for me, all done without digital tech, which reminds me that in 1979, the UK government had the rural transport experiments, and we had a number of those in Strathclyde. But in particular, we had the so-called gypsy services. I don't know whether that would be politically correct these days, but the idea of wandering around was quite a good one. They were successful, but the problem was, like many of these things, that there was no continuity once Routex disappeared and its Scottish equivalent. Once they disappeared, then the services disappeared because nobody else would fund them. So basically that's it. If you're going to have successful rural transport, one of the things I think, and I'll say this later, we need to do is to ensure that there's continuity and we get away from this stop-start funding that bedevils public transport throughout the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Couldn't agree more. Cool. So that's really it from a slide perspective. Now we're going to dive straight into the panel discussion. So the way we're going to do this is I will start with asking questions of the panel. And then towards the end, we'll leave at least 15 minutes to open the floor for questions from all of you. So to start us off, I want us to focus a little bit, just talk a little bit more about, the implementation and delivery of services. So I have a couple of questions first for Vanessa and Craig. For Vanessa first, specifically on the Ready to Go project, I know it was implemented in quite a short period of time. So could you just discuss some of the challenges that posed and what lessons you learned about the planning phase of DRT projects and how that, has an influence over the potential success of one?
So yeah, you are correct. So Ready to Go was implemented in a very short time. That was due to some internal pressures to produce the pilot project rather swiftly. And that produced a number of challenges, of course. So a bit of background, no one in the team had any prior experience with DDRT. So it was something quite novel to put a pilot project like this on. It was a brand new software, which no one was really sure how it would work. So because of the timescales, officers that put it on at that time had only seen the software, like a trial of the software in the procurement period. So there was little understanding of how the algorithms and the metrics worked, and all they had to go by was demos. And there was obviously also, so the project was put on this council funding. So there were certain restrictions as to what provider could be chosen within the budget. So what I would do differently, or what I would urge other councils to do differently, is definitely have a longer lead up time to be able to, put the best possible service out there. If you choose a software provider, which is definitely the most important thing, and which was our downfall at the council, speak to existing customers and get like sort of a reference for how do the software work for them, what are the challenges, what are the pros, and really do your research with the software provider and understand if you're running the back office, which we did, council officers really need to. And I would say it's also really important to build a good relationship with the software providers and to not be shy to bring problems up so they can be swiftly dealt with. I would also say touch base with the community very frequently and get their input to see, does it work, does it not work? Work with the drivers of the actual mini buses, and yeah, it can really help. And something we might speak about a bit later, but have a good communication strategy. I think if a service is sort of well advertised and people have an idea exactly how it works, it can take the pressure off. At the beginning, we had a lot of phone calls that took up officer time just so people knew exactly how it worked. But if you, for example, put on a video explaining this is how the service works, this is how you can book it, this is what you can expect, it can take a lot of resources and pressures off your own team members.
Awesome. Thank you, Vanessa. I think what I heard there was, yeah, make sure you've remained very close to the actual benefactors of the service and understand what they want. I like your comment about not being shy with technology providers. That's something that, you know, we work with Craig and he'll speak to that shortly. But yeah, he's certainly not shy with us in terms of when we, you know, if there's any issues, making sure that we discuss those in detail and working through those. So yeah, fantastic points all around. Maybe moving over to you, Craig, I think with East Sussex, I think you had, you know, a longer lead up time in terms of implementation, in terms of planning for what you wanted to do based on, you know, it was part of your BSIP plan already. I just want to talk a little bit about the FlexiBus, it being, you know, a brand new scheme that was originally designed with multiple zones and a single vehicle operating per zone. Can you share a little bit more about, you know, the initial thinking of that service design, as well as the changes you've made to the scheme since then, and the impact that's had on the service?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So probably you kind of intimated there that we had more time. So I've got a question to answer here. I'll answer the question. We had a bit longer lead time. It might have seemed that way, but certainly in terms of timescales to set up DDRT, and if you look at some of the rural accessibility funding DRT schemes that took a year plus to set up, we basically set up within about 6 months from start to finish. So it was extremely challenging. I'd probably echo Vanessa's thoughts on the challenges to set up DRT, and that is that there's a lot of, well, there's lack of knowledge within authorities. So it's very difficult to set up DRT. We spoke to a number of authorities. We spoke to Scottish Borders. We spoke to Norfolk. We spoke to a number of others who'd already set up DRT. But it is quite challenging because you don't necessarily have expertise. So we did also employ consultants to advise us. But there's a lot of challenges setting up. So in terms of why we had 10 zones, 7 zones, or whatever, we did our best local knowledge. We got a lot of good local knowledge within the authority, so we set up what we thought would work best. So we initially had 10 zones. We've now got 7. So we amalgamated some zones here in the east of the county. Some of those zones, Zone 5 was previously split, and one of those zones was very underutilized, very poor passenger demand as it was. So we did a 3-zone merges around 2.5 months in. When we initially set it up, the routing company software, by Pingo, meant that a vehicle was constrained to a zone. So if you had 10 zones, you needed 10 vehicles. If you had 12, you would need 12. You can obviously have more vehicles and put them in one of those 12 zones, but they were constrained to a zone. And then the routing company were trialing what they call services, which meant that vehicles would no longer be constrained to a particular zone. They were trialing that over in California, I believe, Dami. And when we heard about it, we were like, yeah, we want that. When can we have it? So as Dami kind of said, we weren't shy at coming forward to say, you know, we want this, we want that, we want these developments. And yeah, there were a lot of developments over the first 6 months, 12 months, that being the most significant one. So the Zone 6 vehicle, which was basically used very infrequently, a couple of times a day, was no longer constrained to a single zone, as any vehicle could operate in any zone. We've now got the ability to actually specify what zones the vehicles operate in. So we can say a vehicle can operate in zones 1, 2, 3, and 4, or all 7 zones. So we do actually have some settings where vehicles are constrained to specific zones. That made one of the biggest impacts in terms of our services' ability to satiate and satisfy demand, because we can now use vehicles as and when they're required across the zones. One thing that does constrain us at the moment is there is the requirement to take a break, and those breaks at the moment need to be taken in a specific place. They can't just be taken anywhere. So that's something I'm pushing the routing company to develop, so that if a driver is heading over to the east of the county, they can take a break over in the east, because that's where the demand is. But the system doesn't allow that. They need to have a set location to take that break. In terms of the overall finances, we've obviously got the basic budget, so we kind of took an approach that let's go large, let's cover as much of East Sussex as possible. All those areas there have a lot of rural areas in them. We don't replicate conventional bus services, so a conventional bus service, if your trip can be undertaken by a conventional bus service, you can't book Flexibus, but we are trying to cover most of East Sussex. The areas not covered are quite urban, so we've got Eastbourne down here and Hastings and Bexhill over there, but the rest of the authority is quite rural. So over the first few months, obviously cost us quite a lot per passenger trip because there was a lot less passengers. It took a lot of time to build up passenger demand. We were slightly hamstrung at the start because there was purdah for the first 4 weeks prior to launching, which is really bad timing. It was a unplanned purdah. So yeah, it's taken some time. We're now at a point where it's costing about £35 per passenger trip. Our aim is to bring that down to the 20s and below if possible. We're at 600 passengers per week at the moment, and we're hoping to double that eventually within the time period of the Flexibus service.
Great, thanks, Greg. Cool. So now I want us to discuss, I mentioned at the top of the call a little bit about alternative success metrics, and this question will be for John, who's done some great work on this in the past. We've covered both the more recent pilots and the current service in East Sussex and the recent pilot in Veery. But John, I know you worked on a book and ride service, the D-Side shuttle in the late 90s, where you were able to actually measure, the significant economic impact that a DRT scheme can have on the local community. Can you just speak to what that impact was and how you actually were able to put a number to it? You're on mute.
Let's just go back. Why on earth do we provide transport? I think far too many transport planners, transport operators think it's just to keep them in employment. You dream up a route. If the public doesn't want to use it, then they won't. You dream up another route and so on. And what criteria we're using? We're using, if we're at the planning stage, we're using assessment criteria which are basically designed for major schemes, primarily road schemes, and aggregating large amounts of small time savings is the major metric that's in it. Passenger transport, I would submit, is somewhat different. We're providing for people to let people do what people want to do in their daily lives. And if we're not succeeding in that, we're falling down in our jobs as transport planners and operators. So why the D-Side shuttle? D-Side shuttle was introduced because, I will name names, Arriva would not divert off the main A55 corridor to serve the industrial estate, which was built to replace the former Shot and Steel Works, which had been a major employer not only in Flintshire, but also across the border in Merseyside. And it was one of those relatively rare times in local authority history where there was a reasonable amount of money sloshing around and government were reasonably sympathetic to supporting new initiatives. David Blaney, the coordinator in Flintshire, said, well, if Arriva won't do it, we'll have to put service on ourselves. He put on Dial a Ride, extending the county council's one-stop information service to take the bookings. That cost a Clark. He knew about that. He knew about the costs of the vehicles. But immediately you see a disadvantage that DRT has compared with conventional bus services or conventional train services. It's not just the cost of the vehicle and driver, it's the cost of the back office, the scheduling, and the communications. So fast forward a couple of years, and I'd just left West Yorkshire PTE and moved into consultancy. And we were asked as Elan PTC to take a look at the D-side shuttle. And we found, to our delight, that we've got a virtually complete record of every single passenger journey made, because of the fact that it had to be booked over the telephone. Somebody wrote down what that booking was and then passed it on to the schedulers for overnight scheduling. And we were able to contact some 300 people, and also to contact the employers on the estate and various community representatives as well. And what we found, we thought was very, very significant. We took 3 employees off the long-term unemployment register, and we went with delight to Whitehall and said, how much does it cost to maintain somebody on the long-term unemployment register? This is somebody who's been employed for more than 10 years. And believe it or not, the response was, that's an interesting question. Nobody's asked it before. The person that eventually supplied the answer was the chap that ran the local employment exchange, and he said, well, just take the benefits that we pay out. That must be somewhere near it. It won't have the overheads in it, but just take that. That was 7k a year. The costs of the service at that time, vehicles and back office, were 32k a year. So immediately we had a service which, in conventional appraisal terms, if you'd been able to count the cross-sector benefit going into the Department of Health and DHSS, as it were, then was Department of Health and Social Services. If you counted that, it was probably one of the most successful subsidised services anywhere in the country. But further than that, I think that when you then go on and look at the things that we didn't have the time or the money to quantify, the environmental benefits, the wider community benefits, benefits to the NHS through improved activity, and so on, and not least the contribution, which is now all important, to reducing carbon and net zero, then it was a no-brainer. Why shouldn't we be using this type of service everywhere else? The answer is that we're still wedded to the conventional appraisal methods. Now, if we can, and there is some progress on this, WebTag has been altered to some extent, but it's still all coming from the cost side. What I'm anxious that we find a way of exposing is the benefits to the community, how they distribute themselves amongst all the different services and facilities that the community uses, and that we can say, not that within transport terms, this service is good because of A, B, and C, but we can say in terms of UK PLC, this service is actually enabling people to do what they want to do. And by doing that is bringing benefits to the country as a whole, not only to transport, which justify its continuation. Now, as I say, there is some movement, particularly within for transport, who I think are actually totally convinced of the argument. There's still resistance, of course, from the UK Treasury. There always will be. And probably it's no different either in the Finance Department in Scotland. But if only we could get some big politicians to realise this sort of approach, then I think we could transform thinking very, very quickly. You know, George Osborne, I think, gets it, but is not going to put his head above the parapet. But there must be others, particularly at a time when we're talking about a general election, that if we can get these arguments out in front of the politicians and get them to get answers from the civil service, then we stand a chance of making a transition. But the question you originally asked, Dami, which was how far can we go with DDRT? I say if you widen that to DDRT and transport integration, the answer is the sky's the limit.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I think that's pretty powerful. And I think also, you spoke to the fact that with the difference there was speaking to the specific users again, in your evaluation, understanding what difference it made for them, and then being able to tie that back to the actual value. And I think that's, similar thread to what Vanessa said in terms of, engaging, the users early on as well. You have to do that throughout the project. And maybe Vanessa, I'd like to ask from the ready to go service, when it comes to social outcomes, such as reducing social isolation and improving access, are there any specific examples of benefits that you got in terms of your assessment of that service?
Can I then add another question to Vanessa from the chat, noticing that Linda's got one for Vanessa as well. If Linda wants to ask a question afterwards, Dami, is that all right?
Of course.
Vanessa.
Perfect. So the way we measured success was sort of twofold. So on one hand, we done this by community engagement. So we had several surveys throughout sort of the life cycle of the Ready to Go project. There was also a survey undertaken by Stantec consultants who have sort of helped us with the evaluation of the project. So actually in Stantec's survey, it was revealed that nearly a quarter of users of Ready to Go were actually making new trips that they haven't previously done. So that provided obviously a wide range of benefits, reduce social isolation, reduce loneliness, improve personal independence, reduce unemployment, and physical and mental health benefits. We also did work with relevant partners in the region as Nestrans, NHS Crumpy and the Health and Social Care Partnership. So we tried to collect data and evidence from sort of like all sort of different sources that had access to these communities. And on the other hand, what we've done is we examined the actual data that we had from the software provider, because we could draw a couple of conclusions looking at that data. So, for example, like the data showed that there was a much higher passenger number on the Ready to Go in comparison to the withdrawn services. So that just shows a positive shift to bus travel in general, and that it was meeting travel needs that were not previously met. And also it provided a significant benefit for people with disabilities who would actually not have made that journey on a public transport before, as on a bus, for example.
Right. Vanessa, I think Linda's question to you actually got answered there, because she wanted to know whether you were working with Think or not, and that's been done. I'm just going to take over 2 minutes, Dami, just to go through the Q&As, because I know it's hard to juggle that.